So-called magnetic lines of force. One of the great illusions of nature which has deceived scientific observers is the principle of curvature, which is everywhere present in ever-changing effect in every wave field and in wave fields within wave fields throughout the universe. Wave fields are bounded by planes of zero curvature, which act as mirrors to reverse all radiation, which reaches out to those wave field boundaries. An example of such a plane of zero curvature is the equator of a bar magnet. Iron filings reaching out from either pole will curve gradually in the ever-changing pressure gradients which surround the poles. Science mistakenly calls these curved lines magnetic lines of force. When these curved lines reach the equator, which divides the two poles, they reverse and repeat their curvature as though reflected by a mirror. There are no magnetic lines of force in nature. These so-called curved lines are the radii of the spheres and spheroids, which constitute this radial universe of prolating and oblating matter. Radiation is an electric effect. It is not magnetic. Pressures which surround spheres and spheroids vary greatly in their equipotential pressure gradients. As radiation is maximum at solar or planetary equators, and gravitation is maximum at their poles, the pressure gradients surrounding spheres or spheroids vary in their curvature to conform to these pressures. Gravitation and radiation are both radial. Radii of either the inward direction of gravity or the outward direction of radiation cannot be projected through varying pressures without bending to conform to the varying densities of varying pressure gradients. This, top of the line. Just as a stick, when thrust into water, seems to suddenly break at the dividing plane of the two different densities, so likewise do the radii of incoming and outgoing light rays seemingly bend gradually as pressures gradually become more or less dense. This divided universe is curved. Its two opposed conditions of gravitation and radiation are oppositely curved. Each has a system of curvature of its own, and each system is opposed to the other, for their purposes are opposed. The system of gravity curvature is evidenced in spheroidal and elliptical layers of equipotential pressure gradients, which curve around gravity centers. The surface of the Earth and heaviside layers are good examples. The curvature of gravitation is centrifugal. It is controlled by the north-south magnetic poles. Its office is to extend bodies in motion from their wave axis to their wave amplitudes. The system of radial curvature is evidenced in ellipsoidal layers of equipotential pressure gradients which extend radially away from gravity centers. Radial curvature has the same relation to the equators of suns and planets as gravity curvature has to their poles of rotation. Good examples of radial curvature are the rings of Saturn, the Dumbbell Nebula, and the Sun's corona. The system of radial curvature is centrifugal. It is controlled by two as yet unknown magnetic poles, which will be amply described later as east-west poles. The interrelation of these two pairs of poles are more fully set forth in Chapter 21. The entire matter of curvature is one of the many optical illusions which nature is completely made up of. Curved pressure gradients act as lenses to bend radiating light outward as they pass through their concavity from an inward to an outward direction. The reverse takes place as gravitating rays pass through the convexity of light lenses from the outward to the inward direction. Polarity surveys and measures these pressures, but electricity alone projects and retracts the light, which causes these illusions. The supposition that magnetism is a mysterious force of some kind which attracts and repels has helped to build these wrong conclusions, which the senses have deceived observers into believing. In our home study course, we have very carefully and plainly diagrammed the principle of two-way curvature within wave fields, and the principle of zero curvature, which bounds wave fields and insulates the effect of one wave field from every other one by principle of reversals. So we must let this brief description suffice for the purpose of this treatise. The inadequate law of conservation of energy. The law says that the amount of energy in the universe is constant. That is true because energy is unchanging in the undivided light at rest. But the scientific meaning back of that true law is not nature's meaning. Energy belongs to the invisible universe. It is extended into the visible universe of motion only from a fulcrum which is at rest. The energy, however, does not pass beyond the fulcrum into matter or condition of matter or motion of matter. That which passes beyond rest into motion is an expression of energy, a simulation of energy, an effect projected from a cause to demonstrate what energy can do when projected into the illusions of motion. Energy thus expressed might be likened unto the countless actions of a motion picture. The motion thus expressed simulates the energy and the ideal, which has been projected from an undivided mental source through a divided electric wave source by the way of a fulcrum, zero, upon which the wave oscillates. It cannot be said, therefore, that the energy simulated by the motion picture is in the picture rather than in the source of the picture. Likewise, the same cannot be said of nature's cosmic cinema motion picture of cause and effect, which the master playwright has projected upon the screen of space from the light of his knowing, through the light lenses of his electric thinking. To prove that the scientific meaning of the truly stated law is not nature's meaning, I will quote from a science textbook which explains the meaning of the law as follows. This law means that if energy appears in one form, it must have disappeared from another in corresponding amount. The word appears and disappears indicates that energy is meant to be actually within the visible motion and not in its fulcrum. Thermodynamic misconception. If polarity had been rightly understood by science, the thermodynamic laws and accepted principles would never have been written. Clausius originally wrote the second law of thermodynamics as follows. It is impossible for a self-acting machine to convey heat from one body to another at a higher temperature. This is not true, for nature is constantly doing just that thing in every expression of gravity. Every cold body of rain or snow heats as it falls to earth, and conveys that heat to lift the higher temperature of the earth to a still higher temperature. Every cold body which is added by gravity to a larger body at higher temperature raises the temperature of both bodies by the adding, crushing, compressing weight of gravity. It is the office of gravity to compress, and it is the office of compression to heat, and it is the office of heat to throw off its hot bodies so that they may cool, and return as contracting bodies to again heat. Every cold body which approaches a larger body charges both bodies. Charging bodies heat. Conversely, every body which radiates from a larger body discharges both bodies. Discharging bodies cool. The cold of space heats hot suns hotter by the way of their poles, and hot suns radiate their heat by the way of their equators to form cooling rings, which again heat to become hot planets. The law is further explained by stating that an object will fall of its own accord from a higher to a lower level, but it will not rise of its own accord from a lower level to a higher level. This also is not true. Everything which falls toward one of the two polarized conditions of matter must rise toward the other opposite condition. The interchange is equal. The apple which falls of its own accord rises of its own accord. Water unites its particles into closer relationship in order to fall, then divides into more remote relationship in order to rise. Everything which emerges from space by the way of gravity is swallowed up by space by the way of radiation. This is as true of suns as it is of apples. Every sun which is projected into space by one swing of polarity's pendulum has its mate in a black, vacuous hole of equal potential on the other side of its wave axis, which is waiting to swallow it up when the pendulum reverses its swing. The confusion of observers who conceived that law is due to their not knowing of the balance of nature, which polarity controls. They think of the apple as a heavy object which cannot rise as a heavy object. The layman thinks objectively of an apple as a solid object, but the scientist should think of the apple as one fleeting part of a whole cycle. The solid apple is that part of its cycle which has condensed from a large volume to become a small volume located at the apex of its spiral cone cycle. Scientists should think cyclically and not objectively. The apex of a cone, which one objectively thinks of as an apple, will expand to become the base of a cone, which will eventually spiral into its apex on the bough of some tree to again become an apple. This is not an objective universe. It is cyclic. Objectivity is but one stage of a cycle which is forever moving through many stages between the appearance and disappearance of what the senses interpret as objective. Sorry about that noise. I just realized my speakers, which when they're on, they buzz. I've got to get some better ones. So I turned it off just now. Now back to reading this. I have a few more minutes. The astronomer should likewise think that way of his suns and stars. It should be easier for the astronomer to think cyclically than for the physicist, for he can see his cone apices expand into cone bases for rewinding into new suns, in the same manner that apples expand to become cone bases for rewinding into objective apple forms at cone apices. Figure 131, page 163 is a good example of the way an astronomer should think in relation to all stellar bodies. Had Newton thought that way in relation to an apple, he would not have written such an inadequate, unnatural, and misleading law. Scientists should not think of sequential effects only, but should also think of the simultaneous workings of all two-way expressions. This is how nature works. As the solid apple falls, an equal potential simultaneously rises. If I put my hand down in water, an amount equal to that which is displaced by my hand simultaneously rises. As the apple falls, it simultaneously charges the earth and discharges space. When the apple rises, it simultaneously charges space and discharges the earth. The balance in potential between gravitating matter and radiating matter in every wave field is absolute. Scientific observers have never thought of it that way. They have not thought of space as being divided into definitely measured compartments, such as wave fields. The more evacuated space there is in a wave field, the more solid is the matter which centers it, and the greater the volume of space. As space cools more and its wave fields expand more in volume, its central sun equally contracts and heats. Polarity divides all of its electric effects equally. The volume of negative space may be thousands or millions of times greater than the volume of its positive center, but their potentials are equal to the millionth of an ampere. If this were not so, the Kepler law, which says that equal areas of a radius vector are covered in equal time, would not be workable, nor would the cube ratios of acceleration and deceleration work out.